All right, y'all. So listen, we back to ruin your childhood with some more of these Mandela effects. All right, this one is the 10 strangest Mandela effect mysteries ever that'll creep you out. Let's ruin some childhoods. Let's go.
The Mandela effect is being spoken about more often online these days, as people are realizing that their memories of certain events are not as accurate as they imagined. While most people find this understandable, others are convinced that the past is being changed somehow, but they're unable to say by whom this is being done, or what the purpose of these changes might be. Number 10. Mother Teresa is a name that we all know, as she's remembered today for her charitable work among the less fortunate, and for her creation of the Order of the Missionaries of Charity, an organization of women who worked with destitute people, mainly in India. During her lifetime, she was given several awards and spent 17 years of her life teaching children in India while serving the Sisters of Loreto, which is part of the institution of the Blessed Virgin Mary, based in Ireland. During this time, she became aware of the plight of people living in the country's slums, and she felt that it was her divine calling to care for them. To do this, she moved to the area and lived among the sick and the poor, and after being inspired by her selflessness, many other people joined her, the result being that medical dispensaries and schools were allocated to them. Then, in 1952, she created the Place for the Pure of Heart, where people who were nearing the end of their lives could receive the care that they needed until they passed away. But she didn't just aid the poor and sick. She also tended to the blind, disabled, aged, and destitute. On one occasion, when Pope Paul VI visited India, he met with Mother Teresa, after which he gifted her with a limousine, but she immediately organized a raffle in which someone won the vehicle, and the resulting proceeds were used to fund a leper colony that she had founded. She would be involved in similar charitable work for the remainder of her life, and on the 5th of September, 1997, she passed away. On the 4th of September, 2016, she was canonized and officially declared a saint, after a ray of light emitting from a picture of Mother Teresa was thought to have cured someone's tumefaction, and no medical explanation could be found. She's also said to have healed a man who was suffering from a brain infection, but not everyone remembers these events as they're presented. Some are adamant that she was canonized during the 1990s when she was still alive. One Reddit poster stated that they remember seeing a photo of Mother Teresa on the cover of Time magazine, with a headline stating that she'd been declared a saint. But their confusion doesn't end there. They also remember her name being spelled as Teresa with a TH, rather than Teresa with just a T.
I think I remember it as it being spelled with a TH as well. Come on, man. Y'all can't do. Out of all people, Mother Teresa, y'all are going to change our history from Mother Teresa? Seriously? After just all of the good that she did. She should be off limits now. Come on now, seriously.
Though this is an easy enough mistake to make, since the former spelling is far more common than the latter. This is considered by many to be a good example of the Mandela effect, since there's a large group of people who remember Mother Teresa being declared a saint long before she passed away, and who would find it hard to believe that this isn't the case. Number 9. In 1934, a radio show called The Adventures of Gracie made its debut in the US, though most people will be familiar with its later title, The Burns and Allen Show, which it was renamed to in 1936. The show would go on to air 272 episodes and proved to be massively popular, so much so that it was transformed into a TV show in 1950, and for the following 8 years it remained a favorite among CBS viewers. What many people don't know about the show's two main actors, George Burns and Gracie Allen, is that after they met and decided to perform a comedy duo in 1922, they decided to get married, despite Allen being engaged when they first met. In the TV show, Gracie played the role of Burns' absent-minded yet good-natured wife, and it would remain on the small screen for the next 8 years. It would be nominated for several Emmy Awards and remained popular for the entirety of its run of 8 seasons, which included 291 episodes. Allen eventually passed away on the 27th of August, 1964, at the age of 69 following a heart attack, and Burns would never remarry, passing away later on at the age of 100, also of heart complications. In recent times, though, the show isn't just remembered for the impact that it had on the comedy genre, since it was one of the very first sitcoms ever aired, but also for the suggestion that the show is part of the Mandela effect. One of the most endearing and often quoted moments from the show is one that took place at the end of each episode, when Burns would turn to Alan and say goodnight, Gracie, to which she would reply, good night, Gracie. This exchange between the two characters is so distinctive that it became the title of a Gilmore Girls episode, as well as an episode of Modern Family, though only Burns' part of the exchange was used. That's probably a good thing, since those who remember Alan replying good night, Gracie are mistaken, since she never uttered that line in any of the episodes, much to the surprise of the show's many fans. While it's true that Burns always delivered the line, say goodnight, Gracie, Alan always replied with her line, which was simply good night. And this fact has caused quite a stir among those who follow the Mandela effect and new cases that are observed. There are countless comments from people who state that they remember Alan delivering the longer line at the end of each show, and the only explanation they can think of is that the episodes have been altered by the Mandela effect. Others have suggested a more plausible theory that does indeed make a lot of sense. The sketch comedy show entitled Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, which dates from the late 1960s and early 70s, ended with one character saying, say goodnight, Dick, to which the other replied, good night, Dick, and it's possible that the two shows somehow became confused in people's minds. It's also possible that people just got used to quoting the erroneous lines, and that it eventually became a part of their memories, despite it being a misconception. But many people remain unconvinced and are adamant that their memories of the show are clear, despite all the evidence indicating that the line was never spoken in any of the aired episodes. To them, this remains a Mandela effect mystery that needs to be solved. Number 8. Michelangelo's David is one of the most iconic pieces of art ever created. And while it's still revered as a masterpiece today, it's also being spoken about for another reason, the Mandela effect. The statue was completed by Michelangelo in 1504, after he started carving it in 1501. And not many people are aware that it stands about 2 stories high, and that it weighs around 12,500 pounds, and that the artist broke away from tradition by leaving out Goliath's head, contrary to what had been done by previous artists, who chose to depict the biblical figure of David. He did, though, decide to include David's slingshot, which he used to end Goliath's life, and he can be seen holding it in his left hand, slung over his shoulder. The slingshot was purposefully made smaller than normal to represent the ideal that victory is not always a matter of brute strength.
Even from this angle, this doesn't look like it's 2 stories tall. Now, I admit we only seen it from this angle, and I'm not sure what he's standing on and how tall that is as well. But is that accurate? Is that thing 2 stories tall? Y'all let me know. I'm curious.
But rather of one's intelligence. When the statue was finally completed, it had to be moved from Michelangelo's workshop, and given its weight, this would have been no easy task. It took 40 men 4 days to move the piece just a half mile using rope and wooden scaffolding. But not everyone was as welcoming of the statue as others. At one point, someone threw rocks at the piece, causing some damage to it, and in 1527, a protest resulted in its left arm being shattered into 3 pieces. More than a century later, the statue was moved indoors, but even here it wasn't safe from damage. In 1991, an Italian artist used a hammer and chisel to break off one of the left foot's toes, and hence it was placed behind a protective plexiglass screen, where it remains today. The piece is so inspirational that it's been copied many times throughout history, and as many as 30 life-sized copies exist in countries all over the world, one of which has been placed in the original statue's spot. One last fact that not everyone is aware of is that David's eyes are slightly cross-eyed. But this isn't the only strange fact about its eyes, and many people feel that one aspect is the result of the Mandela effect. Most people don't pay much attention to the statue's eyes, and hence they're surprised when they learn that its pupils are shaped like hearts. They suggest that since the statue has been studied by scholars and art experts for centuries, this would be a well-known fact, and that they would have heard about this fact before. The fact is that no one is certain why the artist decided to make the pupils heart-shaped, since it wasn't a trend at the time, and Michelangelo never gave any explanation as to why he made that decision. Thanks to this lack of information, some people believed they used to look like normal round pupils, and that they've been changed without anyone's knowledge, and for some unknown reason. Others insist that they've not seen the statue in photos, but have visited the site in person, and remember the pupils being round. When they're told that evidence exists of the pupils being that shape since its creation, they argue that these historic records have also been changed to fit the more modern narrative. But the fact remains that the statue hasn't been altered in any way, and what some people see as a Mandela effect is likely just a case of false memory.
Now that's interesting, and if the artist actually did that, I would think he did the eyes that way to see how many people would notice. Because most people know this, the controversy and the statue for being, I thought, naked at one point in time, but now a lot of people are saying it has cloth on it, and it's always been that way. So that's kind of the controversy. And what other reason would people throw rocks and try to damage a statue? Because they feel like it's either disgusting or degrading, or they feel like it shouldn't be displayed in public or anything like that. You know, those same people that lived back then, I wonder how they would feel living today in these days and times where you can't walk outside without seeing nakedness. You can't throw rocks at everybody. But back to what I'm saying, maybe that was him doing that, the eyes that way, to see how many people would notice. Or would you just get stuck on the controversial part of the newness of the statue? That was one thing I thought.
Number 7. The Bologna Central Station clock is a famous landmark in Italy that serves as a reminder of a terrible event that took place at the station on the 2nd of August, 1980. And now it's being discussed as a possible Mandela effect case. On that day, a blast ripped through the station, resulting in many lives being lost, and it's still considered to be one of the worst incidents of its kind in Italy's modern history. The event was covered by media outlets around the world, during which they displayed images of the station's clock, which had stopped at 10:25 a.m., the moment the explosion occurred. It served as a reminder of the tragedy that took place there, and today, it's still hotly debated whether it was ever repaired or left to display the time at which the blast occurred, with some people claiming to have proof that it had been displaying that time ever since. Others remember the clock being fixed at some point, but they're surprised when they're presented with the fact that it still displays 10:25 a.m. today. Though not all is as it seems, since the story is a little more complex than most people remember. The fact is that the clock was indeed repaired very soon after the explosion, and it ran perfectly on time for many years until it broke again in 1996. The decision was made to not repair it, but to leave it displaying the time of the blast as an act of remembrance of that tragic day. But there are thousands of people who are adamant that these facts are untrue. They distinctly remember the clock being left broken after the blast for the same reason, to serve as a reminder of the events that took place there. This piqued the interest of a group of Italian psychologists who decided to collect more information about these claims. They created a questionnaire which they then gave to 180 people, all of whom were found to have been completely healthy. 90 of those participants were male and 90 were female, and the average age of those who were tested was about 54. To participate, they all had to be familiar with the Bologna station, having used it on multiple occasions or having been employed there at some point. They were then asked about the clock, specifically whether they remembered it being repaired in 1980 and reset in 1996. And the group was amazed at the result they saw. 173 of the test subjects remembered that the clock is currently stopped, which is accurate. But surprisingly, only 13 of those recalled it being fixed and that it functioned as normal for years after the tragedy. Even more surprising is the fact that not a single one of the 21 people who were employees at the station remembered it ever being repaired, despite seeing the clock on a near daily basis. And this has convinced many people that it is part of the Mandela effect. One Italian Reddit user has taken to the platform to air his disbelief at the fact that the clock was running perfectly for 16 years. He stated that you would be hard-pressed to find anyone living in Bologna who knew that it had been repaired after the blast. It's likely that most people just didn't look at the clock properly after it was fixed, since they were preoccupied with catching their trains. But there are still many who feel that something more sinister is going on here, other than a collective faulty memory. Number 6. Since his passing on the 25th of June, 2009, Michael Jackson has been the subject of countless conspiracy theories and Mandela effect mysteries. And some of these are so outlandish that they're hard to take seriously. There have been theories that he never really passed away, and that he merely decided to step away from the spotlight for reasons unknown. The theory is that he would never have been able to enjoy his retirement in peace, and so the decision was made to fake his passing. Then there are videos showing what many people believe to be Jackson's spirit that's been seen wandering the halls of his house at what used to be the Neverland Ranch in Santa Barbara County, California, convincing many of his fans that he's haunting the building. Since the Mandela effect started being spoken about on the internet, it's also been speculated that some of Jackson's songs and even one part of his outfit have been changed, leaving a lot of people confused. The first theory has to do with the iconic white glove that he used to wear on his right hand. It's undoubtedly one of the singer's most famous trademarks, and when he was asked during an interview why he decided to wear just one glove rather than two, he stated that he simply thought one glove looked cool, whereas two was just ordinary. But this is where the Mandela effect makes an entrance. Thousands of people, many of whom are fans of Jackson's, remember him wearing the glove on his left hand rather than his right. They claim to have seen live performances, music videos, and photos of the singer with the glove on his left hand. And while this is likely a collective false memory, some people remain adamant that this was the case. Another strange observation was that the glove used to fit his hand perfectly, since it was tailored to his hand, but some people claim that in some videos and photos, it looks far too large, and this could only mean that it either isn't his glove, it isn't actually Jackson in the videos, or that the size of his hand or the glove has been changed. Others have observed that he wore the glove on one hand during some live performances, but switched to the other hand for others. But as is usually the case, there are many people who refuse to believe that he ever switched between the two hands, despite evidence to the contrary. That same glove would eventually be sold.
Remember, he was facing, I'm trying to go back through my mind of that iconic performance, right? Because I want to say the glove was on the right hand. Because he did something with his hair, then he turned and faced, like, facing forward to where his right hand would be facing the crowd when he did the moonwalk, right? His right hand would have been facing the crowd. So I would have thought he had it on the right hand so you could see the glove while he's doing his moonwalk, the legendary moonwalk. Y'all are really messing me up with this one. And this one is truly messing with my childhood, bro. Y'all really playing now.
At auction for a staggering $106,000. But it isn't the only part of the singer's career that's been thought to have been changed by the Mandela effect, since the lyrics of one of his songs are also being discussed in this regard. The song in question is the hugely popular Smooth Criminal, one of the greatest hits that he ever produced. Some people are convinced at the end of the chorus he sings "You've been hit by, you've been struck by a smooth criminal," when they're told that he actually sings "You've been hit by a smooth criminal." They're at a loss for words, and in many of those instances they blame the Mandela effect. But a patient listener would observe that both arguments are correct. While it's true that he repeats the word hit in the first chorus, he does replace it with struck later in the song, so it's not been changed. It's also possible that some people are confusing the original track with a cover version that was performed by Alien Ant Farm, in which their singer always alternates between hit and struck. This version of the song is also extremely popular, and it's easy to see why people would make this mistake, and why they would jump to the conclusion that the Mandela effect was somehow responsible. Number 5. It's hard to imagine that someone living in the US could misremember the date of a holiday as prominent as Thanksgiving. But in recent times, it's come to light that this is indeed happening, and that some people believe the tradition has been altered. If you were told that Thanksgiving falls on the last Thursday of November every year, most people would agree. But there's a large group of people who remember it being on the third Thursday of that month, and that it's always been celebrated on that day. In one interesting case, a man states that when he heard of this phenomenon, he decided to do a little digging of his own, and he thought it would be easy since his wife's birthday fell on the day before their wedding in 1974, and this just happened to be the day before Thanksgiving. He has distinct memories of picking their wedding day as the Saturday after Thanksgiving that year, since they thought it would be a good idea to have 4 days off: Thanksgiving Day, the Friday following it, and the weekend. He added that he's always remembered that Thanksgiving Day since he and his family were busy preparing for the wedding. And while they were eating Thanksgiving Day dinner, he thought about his fiancée and how she would be doing the same thing with her family. There was only one problem. He remembers Thanksgiving falling on the 21st of November that year, the third Thursday of the month, and he finds it hard to believe he could ever misremember such an important date in his life. But he recently found a letter that he'd sent to his mother, in which he recalls spending Thanksgiving with his new wife, and this took place on the 28th of November, the fourth Thursday of that month. His disbelief only worsened when he found a calendar from that year, which also stated that Thanksgiving was on the 28th of November. But he's adamant that he had Thanksgiving dinner with his family and without his fiancée on the 21st. He puts the blame for this confusion squarely on the shoulders of the Mandela effect, and has even gone as far as to suggest that it purposefully targeted him on a personal level for unknown reasons. He's also stated that he doesn't understand why some people's lives are being changed by the Mandela effect, while others are left alone to live their lives as normal, and he isn't alone in his thinking. Countless people have come forward to state that Thanksgiving used to be celebrated on the third Thursday in November, and that the new date was only introduced recently, with some people seemingly not noticing, or being unaware that it's the result of the Mandela effect. When they bring this up with their friends and family, some agree that it used to be the third Thursday, while others state that it's always been on the fourth Thursday.
I can't really argue with that one, because my memories wasn't connected to the day of things. It was more so of, the family atmosphere and everything. I never really paid attention. I mean, you knew it was a Thursday, but you never really paid attention when I was younger to it being the third or the last Thursday. It wasn't until I got older that I started, I think, paying attention. You start figuring out, okay, well, this day and this day off, or this day, and start coordinate different things in your life to make sure you're available and off for that day, that weekend, for the family. So it wasn't until later in life, and as far as I can remember, later in life, I can remember it's been the last Thursday. I don't know, and it's nothing I can connect it to in my childhood to go back and check to verify,
causing them to believe that some selected people are being affected. Number 4. Baseball has been called America's favorite pastime for a very long time, and it's easy to see why. Every year, stadiums at baseball games are sold out, especially during the postseason, when the best teams compete for their respective pennants and the World Series trophy. When it comes to baseball, one name is synonymous with its creation, a man named Abner Doubleday, who also fought in the Civil War as a Union general, after serving as an artillery officer in the Mexican-American War that was waged between 1846 and 1848. Following this, he would be appointed as president of the United States Military Commission, during which he investigated crimes including bribery and treason. He remained in an administrative position until the end of the Civil War, and eventually left the military in 1873. During his retirement, he relocated to New York, where he became the president of the Theosophical Society, which studied spiritualism. He would live until the age of 73 when he passed away in New Jersey. But his legacy lives on in the minds of those who attribute the creation of the game of baseball to him. But when they find out that this simply isn't the case, they're dumbfounded, since they remember learning about it when they were younger, and since they believed it to be a well-known fact. Since they believed their memories could never betray them so badly, they attribute this to the Mandela effect, suggesting that Doubleday did indeed create the game, but that history has once again been altered to serve some other more sinister narrative. The fact of the matter is that Doubleday actually had very little interest in baseball, and never made mention of the sport to any of his friends or members of his family. Those who knew him have stated that he was far too busy developing his military career to be concerned about the creation of a new sport, and there is some evidence to support this. It's been said that one man, Al Spalding, wanted to make sure that people knew baseball was a purely American sport, since there'd been suggestions that it evolved from a British game called rounders. Spalding wouldn't stand for this suggestion, and so he asked A.G. Mills, the president of baseball's National League, and who happened to be a friend of his, to find evidence that the game was invented in America. He found references that a man named Alexander Cartwright had a hand in the game's creation, but he also learned that another man, Abner Graves, had stated that he remembered Doubleday inventing the game, though he was found to be unreliable and was later committed to an asylum. After weeks of research into this topic, Mills had grown weary of the topic and decided to just go with Graves' account, and hence people were wrongly taught that Doubleday had invented baseball all on his own. It's a fact that has caused many people a lot of confusion, and rather than accept that they'd been given the wrong information, or that they had false memories, they chose to blame the Mandela effect. The truth is that no one person was responsible for creating baseball. It's a sport that evolved over many years into the game that we know and love today, and even now it's undergoing changes, much to the ire of a lot of sports fans. While Doubleday should certainly be remembered for his heroic military service, he never had anything to do with baseball or its creation. Number 3. There's one Mandela effect mystery that's causing a lot more controversy than most, since it has to do with an iconic moment in the history of America, and hence a lot of people are hesitant to believe that they either misremember the facts or that they've been misled in the past. The event in question is Paul Revere's famous Midnight Ride, documented in a poem written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and the tale, as most people know it, goes as follows. It states that on the 18th of April, 1775, Revere told his companions that the British soldiers decided to invade Boston that night. They were to hang lanterns in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower. If they were attacked by land, they were to hang just one lantern, but if they were attacked by sea, they were supposed to hang two. He would be waiting on the other side of the shore, and as soon as he received the signal, he would ride through Middlesex warning everyone that he came across. He would eventually spot 2 lanterns in the tower and sped away on his horse crying, "The British are coming by sea," thereby ensuring that everyone was ready for whatever was to come. It's an inspirational story that's referenced in movies, TV shows, and around campfires, and for a very long time, which is why it takes people by surprise when they find out that it was all made up, since it never happened. But once again, since this story is so ingrained in people's minds, they refuse to believe that it isn't true, and instead can find no plausible explanation, other than the suggestion that the Mandela effect has changed the history books.
Throw away the history books, bro. I'm tired of it. I'm sick of it. At this point, I'm sick of it, fam. Are you kidding me? How many of y'all had to study that? Or at least studied a portion of that, briefly covered it in school? I vaguely remember it, but I remember it. And you're gonna sit here and tell me this never happened? Nah. I wanna go back and look at my old school tests. If I failed any one of them, I want my grade changed now. I'm that petty.
The fact is that the blame lies with Longfellow, who wrote the poem. In reality, Revere was still in Boston when the lanterns were lit, and hence could not have ridden to Lexington at that particular time. The poem suggests that Revere came up with the idea for the warning system, and that he then set out on his own to warn others, when the idea was actually that of the Sons of Liberty, and he was joined by at least one man, Dr. Prescott, when he eventually did set out for Lexington. But he also never arrived at either of these places, since he was captured just outside of Lexington, though he managed to escape and Dr. Prescott made it to Concord, where he warned of the impending attack. Proof of these facts exists in the form of a letter that Revere wrote to Dr. Jeremy Belknap in 1798. He states that he was warned about the planned attack, but that he then contacted a friend and instructed him on how to light the lanterns. He was then taken to Charlestown, where his fellow Sons of Liberty informed him that they'd seen the lanterns, but by this point, they no longer served any purpose. He then borrowed a horse and rode towards Lexington. He was then joined by Prescott, but the pair was soon stopped by a British patrol, and when they decided to flee in different directions, Revere chose the wrong path and was captured. He was then questioned for some time and eventually released while Prescott rode on, warning everyone he came across. He was then forced to walk back to Lexington since his borrowed horse had been confiscated. It's easy to understand why people still believe the version of events as they were presented in Longfellow's poem, since it's heroic and victorious, but the truth is that it's mostly fiction, and that Revere was merely one small part of a larger plan. This has been unequivocally proven by historical documents and accounts of people who were present on that day, but many people still prefer to believe that Revere did complete his midnight run, and that the facts have been changed by the Mandela effect. Number 2. Oliver Twist, the second novel penned by famous author Charles Dickens, is a literary masterpiece that's been turned into a feature film and which has been presented as a musical in many theaters around the world. Not many people are aware that the novel actually had an alternate title, The Parish Boy's Progress. And this title refers to John Bunyan's allegory entitled The Pilgrims Progress from This World to That Which Is to Come, which was published in 1678. It also alludes to a series of caricatures created in the 18th century by artist William Hogarth that's titled A Rake's Progress and A Harlot's Progress, respectively. It's been suggested that the tale is based on the life of a real man named Robert Blindcoe, who had published an account of his childhood growing up as a child laborer. This account became very popular at the time that Oliver Twist was published, and hence it's thought that Dickens may have drawn inspiration from it. But we know it as a story of a young orphan boy who grows up in appalling conditions in a workhouse in the fictional town of Mudfog. During his time there, he and the other children are forced to work hard while receiving very little food, and when they do have a meal, it's almost always gruel. They then decide to draw lots, and the loser, Twist, has to ask for an extra portion. This is probably the best-known portion of the story, since Twist bravely approaches Mr. Bumble, the master of the workhouse, and utters the now-famous line, "Please, sir, may I have some more?" But once again, this is a false memory, shared by thousands and thousands of people around the world, since Twist never delivered this line, either in the movie or in the Dickens novel. The truth is that while he does approach Mr. Bumble after being tasked with asking for more gruel, he actually says, "Please, sir, I want some more." This revelation has left many people reeling, since they've watched the movie many times and are familiar with the novel, and hence they believe that the text and the famous scene from the movie has been changed from the originals. They find it hard to accept that they and thousands of other people have a collective false memory. And since the scene is so famous, they're certain that their recollection is flawless, but this simply isn't the case. Some Reddit users have pointed out the fact that Twist says "I want" rather than asking "may I," and they take this as evidence that things don't add up, since he would have never demanded anything from Mr. Bumble, and they feel that this destroys the intended narrative of the scene.
I don't think you have to have seen the movie or read the book to have heard this iconic phrase. Like, I remember hearing it, and I didn't watch the book or see the movie, but I've always heard it as, "Please, sir, may I have some more?" That's what I've heard that reference. I've always heard it in that way. That's crazy. That's crazy.
No one is certain why so many people misremember this part of the tale, and their only explanation is that their memories are correct, while the story's been altered for some ominous reason. Number 1. While there are many Star Trek fans who enjoy every episode of the franchise that was released, there's debate that's been raging for many years as to who the best captain of the Starship Enterprise was, and the honor usually falls to either the original captain, James T. Kirk, or the captain of the Next Generation series, Jean-Luc Picard. The debate remains intact since both captains commanded the helm with confidence and pride, while they both also had certain flaws that made the show even more compelling and unpredictable. The show has a massive following of millions of fans from around the world, most of whom have watched all the episodes several times, which make it hard to believe that it's now the subject of a Mandela effect mystery. Some fans started noticing that Picard had a strange pink crystal on his desk in his office, and while most of us are aware of the fact that he used to touch and even play with it at times, while pondering how to get out of a tricky situation, it's now come to light that the prop is far more prominent in the series than some fans thought. The Next Generation series ran from September of 1987 to May of 1994, and included a total of 178 episodes. But what many people didn't notice is the presence of this particular crystal, which makes an appearance in Picard's hands in as many as 78 of those episodes. But as soon as they're made aware of this fact, fans start to notice the crystal whenever it crops up, and since it then seems like an obvious prop, they believe that the show has been changed to include it, since they feel they would never have missed the crystal if it was there before. Some have suggested that this is a new addition, as Picard would never have needed the crystal, which they see as some kind of comfort blanket, since he's a strong character and is able to make seemingly impossible decisions without anyone's or anything's help. But the fact remains that the evidence is irrefutable. Screenshots of Picard holding the crystal have been uploaded to several online forums and websites. It's been the focus of many YouTube videos, and the topic has been discussed in several forums. When it comes to the Mandela effect, there are usually some very strange suggestions, and this case is no exception. One commenter relented and admitted that the crystal is indeed featured in these episodes. but they stated that they would be keeping an eye on this story in case it changes back to the way it was with no crystal being present. But there's also another side to this case. Some fans have stated that they clearly remember Picard playing with the crystal, and that it didn't just serve as an emotional support prop. They're adamant that the crystal served some other purpose, such as a phaser weapon that he used for protection, or that it could serve as a sensor of some kind, though this also isn't the case. It's very possible that the stone merely went unnoticed, since it was never featured as a major part of any of the storylines, or as essential to Picard's captaining of the ship. The disbelief here stems from the fact that it wasn't used in just 1 or 2 episodes, but in 78. And to dedicated fans, this oversight seems impossible, which is why many feel that it's part of the Mandela effect.